The Last Letter. In a small town in Kansas, surrounded by endless golden wheat fields, there lived a girl named Emily Carter. She was 17, kind and quiet, with eyes that always seemed to be searching for something far beyond the horizon. Her father had been a soldier, a man who never returned home from the war, and her mother worked long hours at the local diner just to keep the lights on. Their old farmhouse stood at the edge of town, where the road turned to dirt, and the only sound at night was the whisper of the wind moving through the fields. Every evening before bed, Emily would stand by the old photograph of her father hanging in the living room. "Good night, Daddy," she would whisper softly, and for a second, it always felt like the wind outside carried his answer back to her. Emily had dreams far bigger than her small town could hold. She loved to draw, people, places, skies she had never seen. Her sketchbooks were filled with scenes of faraway cities, especially New York, with its glowing skyline and endless possibilities. Her teacher, Mrs. Parker, often told her, "You have something special, Emily. Don't ever stop." But Emily knew dreams like hers didn't come easy when there were bills to pay, and her mother's hands were already rough and tired from scrubbing tables. Still, every night she would sit by the window, a candle burning beside her, sketching by the flicker of the flame, losing herself in a world that only existed on paper. One cold autumn evening, Emily stopped by the diner to help her mother clean up after work. It was almost empty, except for one man sitting by the window, staring into a cup of coffee. He wore an old military jacket, his hair messy and his eyes distant, like someone carrying too many memories. When her mother walked over to refill his cup, he looked up and smiled politely, saying, "Thank you, ma'am." There was something gentle about his voice, broken but kind. That night, when her mother came home, she told Emily, "A young man came by today. He reminded me of your father somehow." The next day, curious, Emily stopped by the diner again. The same man was there, sketching something in a small notebook. She approached quietly and asked, "Are you an artist?" He looked up, smiled, and said, "Used to be. Name's Jack." That's how it began. A quiet friendship between two souls who understood loneliness. Every afternoon after school, Emily would sit across from Jack at the diner. He would tell her stories about the places he'd seen: deserts in Nevada, jazz clubs in New Orleans, snow-covered peaks in Colorado. Emily would listen wide-eyed, as though she were seeing the world through his voice. In return, she'd show him her sketches, shyly sliding her notebook across the table. Jack always looked at them with genuine admiration. "You've got something rare," he'd say. "You draw like you're trying to save the world from forgetting." Emily would blush and laugh, not knowing what to say. But as the weeks passed, Jack began to cough, a deep, painful sound that left a trace of red on his handkerchief. Emily noticed, though he tried to hide it. "Just a cold," he'd say, forcing a smile. But she had seen that same look in her father's eyes before he got sick. Something in her heart tightened with fear. Still, Jack kept showing up every day, sometimes bringing her a chocolate bar or a flower he'd picked by the roadside. And every time he'd leave, he'd pat her sketchbook and say, "Keep drawing, kiddo. The world needs your colors." Winter came early that year. Snow fell thick and heavy, covering the Kansas fields in silence. Jack began coming to the diner less and less. When he did, his hands shook when he lifted his cup. One night, as the snow tapped softly against the window, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Keep this safe," he said, placing it in her hands. "It's for when I'm gone." Emily shook her head, tears welling up in her eyes. "Don't say that, Jack. You'll get better." He smiled weakly. "Some people don't get better, Emily. Some people just get peaceful." Then he reached across the table, gently brushing a tear from her cheek. "Promise me you'll keep drawing," he whispered. promise you'll live." A few nights later, a fierce snowstorm rolled across the plains. The roads were closed, the power went out, and Emily sat by the fire clutching the paper Jack had given her. She wanted to see him, to make sure he was okay, but her mother told her the diner would stay closed until the storm passed. When morning came, the sky was pale and silent. Then came the news. Jack had been found at the old bus station, alone, a small notebook by his side. He was gone. Emily didn't believe it at first. She ran to the diner, hoping to see him sitting in his usual seat, smiling like always. But the seat was empty, the cup cold. On the table, someone had left a napkin with a few words written in his handwriting. "Don't cry for me. I found my peace. Live your art." The world seemed to stop for her. It was as if every sound had been swallowed by the snow. That night, Emily sat by the fire again, her mother sleeping in the next room, and finally opened the folded paper Jack had given her. Inside was a drawing of her. She was sitting by the diner window, sunlight spilling across her face as she sketched in her notebook. Underneath, in careful handwriting, Jack had written, "You have the soul of an artist. Never stop painting your heart, Emily. When you see the first snow, think of me." She cried until dawn, clutching that paper to her chest as though it could bring him back. Years passed. Emily finished school and moved to New York City, the very place she had drawn so many times in her childhood. She studied art, worked in a tiny studio apartment, and painted every story her heart remembered. One day, she held an exhibition in a small gallery downtown. The most admired piece was a painting of a young man in a military jacket sitting by a diner window, light falling gently across his face. The title read, "The Diner Window." People stood before it for minutes, moved by something they couldn't explain. When asked who he was, Emily would simply smile and say, "Someone who taught me how to live." Every winter, when the first snow began to fall, Emily would take a walk through Central Park. She'd buy a small cup of coffee, sit on a bench near the frozen pond, and watch the world turn white. And every time, she'd whisper softly, "It's snowing again, Jack." In those moments, it felt like he was still there, sitting beside her, watching over her, quietly. Emily never married. When people asked her why, she'd just smile and say, "Because I already found the love that changed me forever." She went on to become one of the most beloved artists in the city, known for paintings that carried both beauty and sadness, light and memory. In her later years, Emily returned to Kansas for a visit. The old diner still stood there, paint peeling, the sign faded but familiar. She walked inside and saw the same corner booth where she and Jack had once sat. The same window, the same view of the wheat fields, now dusted with snow. She ordered a coffee, sat down, and quietly unfolded the old sketch he had given her so many years ago. The paper had aged, the lines faded, but his words were still clear. She smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft, slow, endless. She whispered one last time, "It's snowing again, Jack." And somewhere in the quiet Kansas winter, it felt like the wind answered back.